everyone. My name is Anita O'Brien. I'm the curator here at the Cartoon Museum, and I'd just like to welcome you all to this celebration of the life of Luke Gertler. And we're delighted to host this. This was, in some ways, I'm not quite sure if Francis would agree, second home, but it was a place that Luke visited very often, and we were delighted to, when Francis asked if we would be happy to host this event here, which was somewhere very special for Luke. We hosted a whole exhibition, I'm sure many of you visited, in Luke's company. 101 Cartoonists, an exhibition of cartoons and caricatures and comics drawn from his lifetime's collecting, his and Francis's lifetime's collecting. And you will see some of the works which he collected. When I joined the museum 15 years ago, the collection was very much smaller than it is now, and we were incredibly grateful to Luke for the many pictures of many kinds which he lent and which he continued to lend to temporary exhibitions, to the main displays, to comics displays upstairs. And he was always so enthusiastic and so interested, and always wanted to tell you about his latest acquisition, and it includes many of which were from Chris, and the beautiful, sometimes the stories behind them and so on. And of course, he shared many fascinating stories about his parents and his mother's wonderful works, which I'm sure you've seen here. So I'd just like to welcome you all, and then I'm going to hand over to Francis, who's going to speak. And then we're very lucky to have some other contributors who are going to talk about different aspects of Luke's life. So, Francis, over to you.
I'll help you off. Well, you're supposed to start this with saying welcome. Well, I say welcome with big glowing letters. You know, you're all very, very welcome. Let's just say I was Luke's partner for 46 years. I'm also a founder member of something called PALS, which is People's Adoration of Luke Society. You're all honorary members now, life members. You know, the people used to ring up and say, "Oh, it's so nice to meet Luke." So me. You know, do come round, bring Luke. So it's my intention. Sorry, I've got notes here because otherwise you have a craft moment. You know a craft moment? Yes. I can't remember. Flaming things. So I've got little notes here to remember. So I'm Francis, 46 years with Luke, founder member of PALS, which now you're a member of. And I'm not going to be a biography and saying, you know, he was born in 1932 and brought up in France. I used to tell this tale so many times, I'm sure you all know it, and documentary evidence and all the rest of it. What I'd like to do is, rather than a biographical thing, just give you 3 snapshots into life with Luke. Yeah, so the first one is when we first met. This is a dinner party, or luncheon party, and he came in with that picture at the very end there, Thomas Shepherd, and it's of Cock Lane in the city of London. And it's sort of like a Freudian attraction. But there he was, coming in, this picture, just bought it. So, you know, first time I saw him, got pictures. More or less the last time I saw him, he got pictures as well. But, yeah, and the story was, I was 25 and I was looking for a nice boyfriend, but it had to have blue eyes and a hairy chest. And I met Luke, and he qualified. And a few days later, I rang some friends and said, "Oh, it's fantastic, it's quite unusual, it's quite great. He's got hairy eyes and a blue chest." And they said, "Yeah, it does sound quite unusual." So that's one story about Luke. What's the other one here? Oh yes, our first Christmas together, you know, you buy secret presents. Some people do, we did. And I bought Luke a quilted dressing gown. It was a 3/4 thing in those days, quilted, purple colours, you know, satinised, a bit John Lennon-ish, you know. And it was great. I loved it. They produced my present. Guess what it was? A quilted dressing gown in satin. Exactly. So I said, well, you two must be compatible somewhere along the line. There's one here. And another story, which is, you all know Luke like books, collecting books, buying books, it was his religion. And there's one story, he didn't tell everybody, but some people do know. You know Foyle's bookshop? He used to have a huge second-hand basement of books, so books full of second-hand, but it was poorly catalogued and badly priced. And Luke used to get quite annoyed going in there, but he'd rummage and find things and buy things. And he did buy things. And one day he was in there and he found this book, correctly priced, paid for it, took it up to the top floor and sold it back to the selling department. Anyway, so it's very little more from me, just except to say we mentioned books, and I mentioned there's a golden condolence book there. If you just put your name in it, so I can remember who bought it, who wrote it, who was here. And I say thank you to Ralph, who produced the book for me, brought it all the way from Nottingham. Really, so many people have been so supportive, it's incredible, I just could not imagine it. And if there's one theme goes through all the condolence letters, emails, they always say, "What a gentle person, a kind person." And he wasn't he? That's very lucky to have him. So anyway, I'll shut up now, because there's Sarah McDougall who's going to speak to you now. Will introduce herself a bit more fully than I will. And we've promised to try and keep any speeches, memories short, so you don't get fall over backwards. Then we'll raise a
I'm
glass.
going to speak for half an hour, is that all right?
To yourself, as usual. Have you taken the pills?
That's fair, no tears.
Thank you.
Well done.
Francis, 46 years. Luke was a saint. This says it all, this huge turnout, wall-to-wall pictures, wall-to-wall people, all feeling very good about him. So, no tears, happy smiles, because Luke was a great man and we're here to remember him. I can't remember when I first was introduced to Luke. He just seemed to have always been there in my life, but I must have been introduced by Francis, because Francis and I go way back to the mid-60s. You may not know this, but this pathetic creature here was once the tyrannical head of nursing in accident and emergency at University College Hospital. They could do with him now. And it must have been you who introduced me, wasn't it? You certainly were very kind to me. I remember him very, very well, Francis. He was utterly efficient, very noisy, very warm, very helpful, and very kind to medical students, because I was seconded there almost in my first few weeks to take blood and deal with drunk Irishmen for the first time. Just a little prick with a needle. I know you are, but what are you going to do with it? So that was Francis who took it. So it must have been Francis who introduced me to Luke, because I don't remember it, but Luke and Francis always seem to have been there. They'd come along to the life of the gallery. Luke was always popping in, Francis not so much, because as you know he's not very cultural. But if there was a private view and the smell of alcohol and lots of noisy people, Francis was there as well. So I had the pleasure of these two for many, many years. Why was he so lovable, Luke? Why was he? You've all got your versions, but it wasn't just because of a benign, eccentric personality, a singular person. It wasn't because of all that. It wasn't because he was just a diverting companion without malice. It's because he was a gentle man. He was gentle. And we need lots more Luke Gertlers in this age that we are. If the world was full of Luke Gertlers, it would be a better place. You can't imagine Luke Gertler bombing Syria. or tweeting about shithole art dealers.
But you can't imagine him knowing where it was.
What, shithole? I think he did. I like to think of Luke as the Edward Ardisoni of art collectors. And I knew him as an art collector. He was always popping in and out, selling me things, buying things, showing me the books, talking about the latest fascinating total non-entity that he discovered, added to his thousands of illustrators that he always had. But the books were important. Because Luke understood what the essence of illustration is. It's not just about the wonderful image. It's about the fact that it is interesting because of other reasons, because it's expressed in other ways. And the books were very important to him. Now, his close companions are going to miss him very much. And I'm going to miss him very much. But I would have like to have ended by being part of an evening, just one evening, over a bottle of wine in the warmth of the south of France, with much convivial activity and talking into the night, bollocks about some illustrator. It would have been wonderful. They are not long, the days of wine and roses. Out of a misty dream, our path emerges for a while, then closes within a dream. Now, the man who said that was Ernest Dowson, and he lived to the age of 33. We had Luke for 85 great years. So that, if you've got glasses, toast Luke.
Hello, everybody. My name's Sarah McDougall, for those of you who don't know me, and I'm very honoured to have been asked to say a few words tonight. I got to know Luke and appreciated the same qualities that we've heard about from everybody: his kindness, his gentleness, his humour, and his passionate interest in art and as a collector. I got to know him through his father, Mark Gertler. In 1995, I audaciously wrote to Luke to ask if I could write a biography of his father, whose life had fascinated me since I completed my MA on him at university. Luke didn't know me at all. I was a completely unknown author. I'd written nothing. He took me into their home. Both of them took me into their hearts, and we spent many hours poring over books, visiting people, visiting collections, auction houses, getting to know all the pictures by his father. It was a great kind of detective trail, and I was really privileged to have Luke by my side. When the book finally came out, and it took me 6 years, of which Luke very patiently waited the results, we had a launch party, and Luke gave me a little letter that belonged to his father, and that's been framed on my mantelpiece ever since and has meant a tremendous amount to me. My husband, who's here tonight and won't like to be pointed out, this is very shy, also we both became friends with Luke and Francis, and that friendship has continued for 20 years now. We have put together a little selection of slides here, which are a few things about Luke. I think Anita is kindly operating that. And a few of his father's work. Okay, so they'll appear gradually. Like Francis, I didn't want to go over the whole of Luke's life, but I thought it might be nice to just mention a few parts where his life and obviously his father's intersected. That sounds rather strange, but in fact, as many of you will know, Luke was only 6 when his father died. Therefore, he didn't know his father well. And for me as a biographer, that was wonderful, because he was as interested as I was in finding out everything about his father, whatever that might be. And Mark had at times a racy life, and Luke was completely fine for me to uncover all aspects of his life and delve into it. As the pictures continue, you'll see a few of the pictures which meant a great deal to Luke. This was created by Mark, his father, when he was 14. It's one of the earliest paintings he did, and I know that Luke was very fond of this period of his work. Moving on from there, this is a portrait of Luke's grandparents, Mark Gertler's parents. He grew up in Spitalfields in the East End of London. The whole family was repatriated back to Austria, to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, then came back to Spitalfields. And he worked his way out of this poor Jewish East End childhood, became a real star at the Slade School, where he painted works like this. And if we can go on, I think we've gone slightly out of sequence, but never mind. That's Dora Carrington, who was at the Slade School with him. She was the great love of his life. They had an affair for about 10 years. Next one. This is one of Luke's favourites. In his early life, Mark did a lot of work of the Jewish East End community. and very, very carefully observed with a great deal of colour and fine painting. He went on to do works like this. This is one of his best known works, moving away from that style. I'll let Anita continue to show you the works. I'm sure many of you will recognise them. And I just talk a little bit more about Luke before I come down. So Luke was born in the last decade of his father's life. And this was a difficult period for Mark as a painter. He suffered himself from tuberculosis, from depression. He had money worries, and his work, which had been incredibly successful, was becoming much less popular in the 1930s. So Luke was born in this era, and his birth too was a time of great anxiety for his parents. He was born prematurely in 1932, weighing only 3.5 pounds, and he was wrapped in cotton wool and put in an incubator, and his life hung in the balance for many days. And only at the end of that month was Mark able to write to friends that Em and the child were doing all right. As they came away from the hospital, Mark made a little sketch of himself and Luke in the back of Arthur Bliss's car. Arthur Bliss was the Queen's composer and their Hampstead neighbour and a friend. There's the portrait of Bliss, which is now in the National Portrait Gallery. And when you see the little sketch of Luke, I find it very affecting because it's actually the only portrait he ever made of Luke. Luke was not allowed in the studio, nobody was, and he wrote that he had to wait 40 years to go inside that studio. He therefore, as I said earlier, was very interested in uncovering everything about his father and his work, and that made him a wonderful companion to go on such a journey with. So I think I will close there because I know there are loads of people here who want to say things about Luke. And I just wanted to mention finally, this is a beautiful portrait that Luke acquired after he was left a little legacy to buy something of his father's work. The picture had belonged, the Costa woman, to Peter Pears, and he sold it after the building in Aldborough burned down early on and they needed to raise funds to rebuild it, and Luke bought it, and it was the picture that he most loved and was very proud of. There's going to be a little display at the Tate opening on the 12th of February of his father's work, which will run for 10 months, and this will be one of the stars of the show. So it's a very fitting tribute to Luke, and I hope you'll all come along. Thank you.
Yeah, quite a lot of people have said they'd like to say a few words about Luke. I said, no more than 3 minutes. But that, when you get around 30 people, that's a long time. No, just 2 or 3 people I know will be very disappointed unless they said something about Luke. Whether it's going to be rude or otherwise, I have no idea. But anyone who put their hand up to jump up there? Francis. Come on, Jeff, don't look up too high.
I'm not sure the table's going to take me.
I think you're all right.
3 minutes starting from now.
Hello, my name's Jeff White and I'm an alcoholic. I'm in good company. Hello, I worked with Luke at the BBC for 11 years. I met Luke 42 years ago, and I think Chris Beadle is here, isn't he? Yeah, I bought the pictures and the books that he couldn't sell you. So I have a huge collection of bits and bobs that I bought from Luke. And a lot of what I'm going to say you've heard already, which is what a gentle man, what a kind man, what an inspiration. And he was absolutely lovely to work with. To work with Luke was just what everyone loved Luke. And a few years, I'm talking nearly 40 years ago, I got invited over to Luke and Francis' house, and they were queers. I'd never met queers.
In the BBC?
I was a very naive man. And they were lovely. Francis gave me a glass of wine, asked me to sit down on a couch, and I was really worried about it for reasons I just couldn't make my mind up. So I had to get my lesson. And I walked round this couch, and it started looking like a counselling couch. The more I walked around it, and I thought, I've got to sit down, because Francis keeps on saying, will you sit down? So I thought, right, it would seat 3 people really close. 2 would be fine. So I thought, I'm going to sit in the middle. So I sat in the middle. I thought, they won't get on here. Luke sat down, Francis sat there, and I was trapped. And you know what? I've been trapped ever since. I've been trapped in a great friendship with Luke and Francis. They were fantastic hosts, incredible people to know. I just couldn't believe what a lovely and kind man Francis was. We're giving Luke an awful lot of time. No, it's his time. But Francis, you were a lovely man, and it was lovely meeting you at that point in time. Well, that one got through okay. I thought you were going to shout at me. One other little quick story is I'm a Rupert Bear fan. I've collected trillions of annuals. I've got the most in Sussex. And Luke knew that there was a sale of Rupert Bear pictures coming up, or one picture, and it was in South London. He said, oh, come along with me, Jeff, and I'll help you, And I said, well, I can't afford more than about 50 quid. And he said, well, what I'll do, Jeff, is I will lend you any money it comes. So if it comes to £100, I will buy it and you can pay me back. I went, that's great. So it got to the thing. I'd never been to an auction before, and we bid and we bid and we bid. We got up to £100. Then we got up to £120. Then we got £150. And I'm thinking, I can't afford this. But it didn't matter, because it didn't matter how much I would have bid, I still lost it. Because the big collector of Rupert Bear at the time was Paul McCartney. He bought it. So that's my story. I've really lovely to share it with you. And here's to Luke and Francis.
One more person here to speak. Much prettier than Jeff White.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, Luke and his family, his parents and his brother Michael and Francis and a whole crowd of people are part of the mythology of my family as well as the reality, because we knew each other over 3 generations. I say we, meaning my family. And the first I heard about Luke was that he was in this paradisical place in the south of France during the war. Now, when I grew up, I learned it was not paradise. It was quite tough, to put it mildly. But then, when I was very, very grown up, and sort of, I can't even remember how old, but quite old, I got to go to France and found this beautiful, beautiful, beautiful place. Oh, by the way, I fell in love with him when I was 15. That was inappropriate. But then I met him again when I was however ancient I was and however ancient he was. And I fell in love with Cabriere, and I've been going ever since, every year. And got to know Luke and his family, his brother, his Francis, very well indeed. And I'm torn apart because he's gone. But he had probably one of the best deaths you could possibly manage. If you're going to die, he did it in a place he loved, with the people he loved. And I loved him dearly, in a different way when I was grown up properly. He was just the most lovely man. As indeed, I never met his parents, I was too young. But my parents knew them, and my mother loved his mother. She just thought she was the most wonderful person in the world. And they're just an amazing family. So Luke is a massive loss. Thank you.
Thank you. Hear Malcolm's voice.
Francis,
Yes?
can I just say something?
Yeah?
I just want to say on behalf of the neighbours.
Neighbours. The riff-raff in Queen's Park.
The neighbours. How much I miss Luke walking up and down my road. I still see him walking up and down my road. There's a sense that he'll always be there. And in the 25 or so years that I've lived opposite you, I've really valued his kindness to me, his friendship. It was always a better day when I'd had a word with Luke. And the other thing I'm really pleased about is that he accepted my bits of fabric and made a lovely cushion.
He did.
It will go on, I hope. Anyway, thank you. I just wanted to say that.
give Malcolm Howard 3 minutes.
Ladies and gentlemen, like Henry VIII said to each of his 6 wives, I won't keep you long. Not true. I've met Francis 48 years ago in the Queen Anne Tea Rooms in Oswestry when I lived in North Wales, and then we re-met in London when he was living with Luke. And I have many treasured memories, as everyone has here, of dear Luke. I'd just like to mention one. The day came when the powers that be allowed a blue plaque in memory of Mark Gertler, and I think it was Luke and Marjorie, his mother, chose Elder Street, where he painted in an attic, and I was privileged to attend. And Luke unveiled the Union Jack and made the most remarkable, moving speech of tribute to his dear father, who he lost, of course, when he was 6 years old. And I shall never forget the tribute of a son to a father. I don't know if there's a record of it, but it was quite remarkable. It demonstrated all Luke's finest characteristics. To end on a humorous note, we then were allowed in the house, which belonged to a finance company, but we weren't operating on a Sunday. And I helped a very old lady stumbling on the stairs. I'd be stumbling myself now as we approached the attic. And she said, the last time I came up in these stairs, I posed in the nude for Mark Gertler.
Should I close proceedings? If anybody really is burning, certainly you can do, but I know you'd all rather just raise a glass to Luke Gertler. And thank you again. Please, Mellowback. There'll be a few more nibbles about. I think it's a bag of crisps we're down to now. I'm sure there'll be a drink for you. Then we'll be closing down. Okay, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.